Thank you for coming to this month's webinar. We will be discussing today EV charging and how that relates to permitting. So as always, in the chat, make a note of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult or complex it is to get an EV charger permitted in your community. And also, while you're doing that, just a friendly reminder to, if you haven't already, to rename yourself so that your Zoom name includes the community that you are representing. I'll say, I think for some of the communities that we've talked to about this specific topic, some people aren't even quite sure what that process is to get an EV charger permitted. So maybe that would make it really complex if you're not sure what to do. That can add a level of difficulty. All right, well, while we're waiting for those to come in, Lindsay, would you please advance to the next slide? We can talk about our agenda for today's call. So we have a few new teammates that we would like to welcome, who will be supporting you in our work in EV Smart. And so we just want to give them a warm welcome so that you know their name and who they are if you ever need support from us and you see their faces in the future. Lindsay then will be talking about some training related to charging installations, as well as walking through a permitting checklist that we've developed for you all. And then we have a guest speaker today from Oakdale. Hannah Dunn has graciously agreed to walk us through Oakdale's permitting checklist that they've recently developed. And we will be followed up with a Q&A session. And so if you have questions throughout today's presentations, feel free to throw them in chat or remember them, and we will have a chance to discuss that at the end of this webinar. And then after that Q&A, as always, we will have our next steps piece so that you know what to expect from this program moving forward. All right, thank you, Lindsay. Let's move on to welcoming our new EV Smart teammates. If you are able to come off camera, and they're going to introduce themselves really quickly. Our first new teammate is Mackenzie Love, who is a senior program manager and transportation planner here at the Great Plains Institute. Welcome, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm happy to be here with you and everyone on this call. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you a bit better. For a bit of background, my experience is in transportation planning, and I have specialized in bicycle and pedestrian planning, transportation demand management, and emerging technologies, and looking at all of those through the lenses of sustainability and equity, which is part of what really drove me to join the GPI team. I just think the work here is wonderful, and I'm glad to be part of it. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time if I could be of assistance to you in any way. And thanks. Back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Mackenzie. And we will have everyone's emails at the end of this presentation, which will be shared out. So if you want to get in contact with any of these people, more than welcome to do so. We also have, I don't believe he's on the call right now, but we have Kyle Young. He is a sustainability project coordinator, and he's serving at GPI as an AmeriCorps member. And so we're really excited to have Kyle on. He's already doing a lot of great work developing resources for you all. And then last but definitely not least, this is their, I think, third day now. We have Emery Solomonson, who is a Minnesota Green Corps member serving with the Great Plains Institute. So Emery, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Emery. As Rebecca said, it's my third day serving with Great Plains Institute through Minnesota Green Corps. So I am learning alongside everyone else here, but I look forward to being able to provide any help.
Yes, and we're really excited to have Emory join us, and they're already doing a great job diving into looking at all the resources and whatnot. So we're really fortunate to have such a great team, and we are excited for the support that we'll be able to continue to provide you all moving forward. So excited about that. Thank you. So I will pass the baton off to Lindsay to discuss some different trainings that are available for you all.
Good morning, everyone. I can maybe even advance my slide a little too far ahead here. Oh, maybe not. Oh, I see. I swapped the way that they are there. Oh, well, we'll talk about this first. No, it doesn't make sense. We'll talk about this first. So as we've been talking to our communities, some of you all are working on the silver designation level. And one of our prerequisites for obtaining that silver level is what you can see in that first pink box. It's train permitting and inspection staff on best practices for permitting and inspecting EVSE or electric vehicle supply equipment. But the way that a lot of cities are set up in Minnesota is the electrical inspectors are not city staff members. Sometimes they are a third party, sometimes they're through the state. So we have modified the language of this requirement to kind of better fit our communities here in Minnesota. So now the requirement reads as train applicable staff on best practices for permitting and inspecting EVSE. And we just kind of have some suggested applicable staff here. So building and electrical inspectors, building and electrical permit technicians, code officials, community development staff, planners or zoning staff, and anybody else that would have any sort of say if a build gets approved that has EV chargers in it. This might look different from community to community, so we wanted to change the language to that. So this is just kind of opening up a little bit more doors for different staff to be able to earn this prerequisite for your communities. And on top of that, we know that some communities still might not have any of these folks working with them. And if that's the case, and you are working on the silver requirement, please have a conversation with us. Feel free to send me an email and we can jump on a Zoom call or a phone call and just kind of talk through what that means for your community and still get you set up best to get that silver requirement. So that is this, and they also have a way of getting you that staff training. So this is an option to obtain this prerequisite. We've done a little bit of searching and we found a free online training through the National Fire Protection Association. It is a pretty standard EV overview with a few kind of personal accounts from either code officials. And I think we also will allow, if you watch the charging station installer edition, as that one has a little bit more information on just kind of what you would need to do as an installer, which might help the inspection side of things. So there's 2 free trainings on this website. It's like under an hour to complete them. I actually completed them both. It's a really good way to get your staff kind of a broad understanding of EVs and just so they're familiar with them if they start getting questions from your community members. This is, like I said, one option that you can do to complete this training requirement. It's not the only option. If you find a different training that you would like to, have your staff, your colleagues take, that is certainly okay. Just let us know which one it is and we'll take a peek at it, make sure it fits the bill, and it should be fine. This is a screenshot from the program on National Fire Protection Association. They have a lot of trainings on this website as well if you are looking for other things, but this is just my course that I took after it was completed. It's basically just a quick information sheet, about 45 minutes or less of videos and interactive training, and then a quick assessment at the end, just to kind of gather how much information you retained. So this is available for free, and I'll talk about how you can get there. You'll want to navigate to nfpa.org. You'll need to create an account to be able to access this training. If you search in like the search bar, just electric vehicles, it will bring you to their alternative fuel vehicles, which actually the URL just says EV in it. There's lots of different articles about EV safety and fire safety, and a couple different trainings as well. On this page, you'll also be able to find the code official community EV preparedness training. And then you'll also be able to find the EVSE installer community preparedness EV training, which is that free one hour one. Once your applicable staff completes this training, you should just submit the certification PDF to myself or Rebecca, and we will get it logged in your completed actions folder for EV Smart. I also included on this page here, I need some questions about fire safety for EVs as it pertains to our first responders and fire departments and police officers. So there is actually a paid training on this website too that I think would be helpful for those interested in pursuing that. This is not tied to the training action that is the requirement, but it's on the same website, so I thought I would link it here. It is a $30 4-hour course, but it did mention on the webpage that if you are a member of the U.S. Fire Service, that it's for free. So I'm not sure if that applies to any of your colleagues or not, but the recommended folks are fire service, emergency medical service, crash reconstruction, and tow and salvage personnel, just to understand the safety that is involved with EV batteries. So that is all of the stuff on that one requirement. And then we will move on to talking about the permitting checklist. So we finally have the template ready for you to go. And this is a bronze requirement in the EV Smart program. We're halfway through and now we're finally, we have the information for the requirements for you. So this is to create a electric vehicle supply equipment permitting checklist. And this is for your community members, either residential or commercial, that would like to install EV chargers in your community, whether that be in their garage, whether it be outside their business, or perhaps even on the right of way, but that might take even more permitting. So we have a PDF, which I will walk you through here in a moment. These are just a couple screen caps from it. But it's basically like any of our other guides. It kind of has like a who it's for, how to use it. We have these template instructions that you'll see here. And then we also kind of give a bunch of optional areas that you can include on your own checklist. Ideally, we would like this to be located on your city website to make it accessible to a broad range of individuals. But if you don't have a place to put it on your website, you can also have it printed off for community members if they stop in to get these permits. Definitely, you can do both. It's definitely good to have it accessible in as many ways as possible. And this is just a template. I'll remind you right before we even get started, it's really the entire thing is, pick and choose what works for your community, add things in that maybe you have that we didn't highlight here, make the language make sense for how you do your other permits. We just really want it to inspire you, give you different language to use, but modify it to fit your communities. And then I will quickly move my screen over. All right. Can you all see the permitting template on the screen right now as a PDF?
Yes.
All right. So I will just kind of briefly walk you through this, and I will be sending this out in an email right after this webinar, or maybe at least by Friday. As I said here, just kind of the intro paragraphs. This whole guide is meant to be used by you and your colleagues as local government staff to assemble a permitting checklist. You'll see here that I think you first should kind of review the template, make sure that it has what you need, find any gaps that you might want to include, and then go through the optional categories. We have lots of optional kind of paragraphs that you can include with your template, or sorry, with your checklist, but you can also include them in other places on your website or in your literature to your community members. And then there's just 2 required sections, which are your contact information and then also your checklist itself. You'll see that there are several sections on the template that have highlighted language, and this is where you need to put your own community's language in, like name of your city or name of person to contact about this, so on and so forth. This next section here is just kind of some links that you can click to provide more inspiration and ways to format these things. The first one is the City of St. Paul permitting application process, which our checklist is kind of heavily based on, and I think Oakdale's as well, as you might see later on. But it gets the basics down, which is what we need. The next link is to the Alternative Fuels Data Center, just kind of a charging infrastructure, procurement and installation, kind of different links that support different ways to talk about that with your community members. And then the last is a very robust California permitting guidebook for electric vehicle supply equipment. And this is California, so take that with a grain of salt. They have a little bit more state laws and state permit processes than we do in Minnesota, but they really go in detail if you really kind of want to see a full picture of things that you can add. And then we just have some, okay, then we dive into the components that you can build your checklist out of. So you'll see optional before each of these sections, which means, include it if you want, don't include it if you want, totally up to you. But we just kind of provide some basic language that might help your checklist. So we have some definitions. We have just kind of a little table for the charging information. So community members can kind of understand, voltage, power, and then what their use is. We kind of were thinking that, if somebody comes to your city and says, hey, I want to install a charger, this might be an appropriate time to provide them with some cost saving resources. So we have just the federal tax credit, which is under the alternative fuel refueling property tax, and it's linked here. You can also include if you have utility programs for chargers that they maybe have rebates on, make sure to put your own utility and link to their program in this one. Same with kind of other incentives from them if you want to include. And then also if the city ever at any point starts offering any charger incentives, you can have that listed here as well, just as kind of a helpful, step for individuals. Another optional piece, I know we're talking about electrical permits here, but if you wanted to include the Minnesota State Building Code anywhere near your permitting guide, we have the small little snippet here from the 2020 Minnesota Building Code right here. It's also linked on this link, and then you can kind of see where it lives in the building code. Additionally, the state of Minnesota is actively working on making this updating this right now, and they have that working group that's meeting to talk about how they are going to add more guidance into the building code. And so we have this here too. You don't have to include this if you don't want to. Another thing that could be helpful in this kind of same vein is if you do have a charging ordinance in your city, linking it here just to kind of really give everybody the full picture of what's going on in your community with ordinances and also what permit items you need required. The next one is accessible charging infrastructure, and this is very much so just copy and pasted from the Access Board's design recommendations for accessible electric vehicle charging stations. I included a couple different things here, just if you wanted to provide just some standard language on how a community member could install an accessible charging station. And this goes beyond just the ADA, the typical ADA, just for any sort of building. This is to really ensure that the charging station itself is accessible. Once again, you can choose to include this or not, totally up to you. And then we get into the required information, and this is really for the permitting process itself in your city, whether it's, file an electrical permit with our permit technician, and then the state electrical inspector will come out. This is really where you need to really carefully consider who your contact information will be, how people can get a hold of you if they have questions about how to permit a charging station in your community. So all of this is, fill in your own. And then the main star of the show here is this, quick little checklist, and you don't have to format it like a table. You don't have to have any of these specific items in here if that's not how your community typically would do a electrical permit. But we just kind of have the basics here. And once again, this is kind of based off of City of St. Paul's, especially this wording right here. This just kind of tells you what needs a permit. And I think Hannah will talk a little bit about this as well. And then we just have the steps. These are all kind of steps that we have recommended at GPI that you recommend to your community members. And I think first is going to be talking to your electric utility as the person installing the charger, just to understand placement, and then also, load requirements that they can help make sure will work. You can link MN charging if you have multiple utilities in your community, or you can link just directly to your utility. If you have a trusted contact that would be helpful to your residents, you can link their contact information here as well. One of our EV Smart ways you can get points is if you start to offer pre-application meetings with your building department, or whatever department would want to have a pre-application meeting with people installing chargers. So if you do start offering these are points that you can earn in EV Smart. If you don't offer them right now, don't include them on this checklist. your standard contractor license number, if you have a contractor working on this. And then these are all kind of optional. You can tweak them to your community's language. It's about what plans are required prior to the installation, and then also what fees you might require for this permit. And then also how to schedule an inspection, whether that's with a staff member or with a, your contracted inspector for electric permits. And yeah, this is our template. And if you have any questions on how to use this or where to put it or anything like that, I am always open to discussing with folks. But I know a lot of you are this close to getting bronze, and this is how you're going to get bronze. So this is really important for the program itself. And yeah, I'm open to talk about it as much as you need to. With that, I will go back to our PowerPoint. And then I will introduce Hannah Dunn. She is the Community Development Specialist with the City of Oakdale. And she will talk you through how they recently got their EVSE permitting checklist up and running.
Thanks, Lindsay. Like she said, I'm Hannah Dunn. I'm with the City of Oakdale. The city recently completed the electric vehicle supply equipment permitting checklist. So I'm just here to go over how we did it, who was involved, and any tips to pass along. Next slide. So this first section I'll go over is what our checklist looks like and the information that we included. So you can advance to the next slide. The checklist is found on a web page of our city website. Since I can't paste the entire web page onto one slide, I just took a bunch of screenshot snippets of the checklist and pasted them on multiple slides. So this first screenshot is what you'd see at the very top of the checklist web page. In that first little section, just kind of explains the purpose of the checklist, that we're providing these following steps so that people can install electric vehicle charging infrastructure with minimal effort. It then goes on to describe that number one, what does not require a permit. That describes that plugging into existing 120 volt receptacles does not require modification to the electrical system and therefore does not require a permit. Lindsay talked about that at the very, right above the table. And then the next section is we outline the simple steps to obtain a permit. So first, an application for an electric permit must be submitted, and we've linked to where you would submit that application. And then second, the permit must be paid for. So on this checklist, we decided to not include any references to dollar amounts. So we've just linked to our electrical fee schedule. This was done just to eliminate extra places where dollar amounts need to be changed when fee schedules are updated. So that was a kind of a conscious effort to not include dollar amounts. And then at the very top right, there's the contact us portion of the webpage. So we provided the building inspection code enforcement email and phone number. So that's the main contact information for obtaining EVSE permits. Next slide. Then if you were to scroll down on the webpage, you'd first find the requirements for residential electric vehicle supply equipment installation. So we've said that either a homeowner can opt to install a single unit or they can hire an electrical contractor. And if they use an electric contractor, then we'll just want that license and license number. Next slide. Then if you were to scroll further, you'd find the requirements for commercial electric vehicle supply equipment installation. So the residential permit did not require a site plan or review by City of Oakdale zoning staff. But however, for commercial installation, we decided that that will require more of a site plan. And we've laid out the information that applicants are expected to supply. So for these sorts of projects, we just want to have a little bit more hands-on. So we've got the proposed work, the project address, the plot plan, the manufactured data sheet. These sorts of installations have to comply with ADA. And then again, you must use a licensed contractor, so you'll need the license and the number. Next slide. And then at the very end of the checklist, we've linked to the building permits inspections page so that applicants, if you were to click on that link right there, building permits inspections page, you would go to a new web page with all the information for inspections so that applicants have a better understanding of how inspections work and how scheduling them works. Like Lindsay said, we are a city that does not employ electrical inspectors, so we use a third party, and then that information is provided in that inspections webpage as well. Next slide. So that kind of runs through all of the information. Is very similar to what Lindsay had in the table. When we were initially drafting the checklist, it was all done in Word, but then the city is trying to move away from just linking to PDFs on our website. So we decided to create its own web page. We first had to decide where on the city's website the checklist would live. So we chose for its home to be we have a electric vehicles web page already set up. So we decided it would live kind of in that hierarchy on the website. So this electric vehicles webpage has just a bunch of information regarding electric vehicles. And we already had a charging infrastructure guidelines document. So we kind of lumped that guidelines document and the permitting checklist into one section on our website called charging infrastructure and installation. We differentiated the guidelines document from the permit checklist. So for residents and businesses looking for just general information and best practices, we direct them to the guidelines document. So that's the first section called guidelines for getting started. And then for residents and businesses who are ready to actually install infrastructure, we direct them to the permitting checklist. So that's the second section called installation requirements. So if you were to click that link that arrow on the slide is pointing to, you would be taken to that checklist that I just went through. Next slide. Now, the electric vehicles webpage isn't the only place on the city website that the checklist and permit application needs to be referenced. There's the whole part of the website for building permits. So we had to look through a bunch of different web pages to see what sorts of information needed to be edited. And one place was on the building permits webpage. We had a long list of all the permits that you can apply for. And so we edited the electric permitting link to specify that that's indeed the right permit for electric vehicle supply equipment installation. So that arrow is pointing to that, that link right there on the slide. Next slide. And then something else we had to consider was that we do all our permitting through OpenGov. That was a recent move within the last year, so we're still kind of working through lots of stuff with that. Nothing had to be changed within the existing framework for the electrical permit within the OpenGov portal. We just had to clarify that that was the right permit for this type of work. Next slide. And then in this next section, I'll just briefly touch on the process of creating the checklist. Next slide. At the very beginning of the process, I had initiated conversations because I knew this was something we needed for bronze certification. So I initiated conversations with the building inspection staff. We had a short initial meeting with me, the chief building official, and the permit technician, just to ensure everyone was on the same page and understood the purpose and intention of the checklist. Then building staff went and created the draft checklist because they have a better understanding of the permitting process and the requirements. It was then sent back to community development staff for feedback. And then once the checklist draft was revised based on feedback, building inspection staff produced a final draft. This then got the final approval from the chief building official and the community development director. And then once that final draft was approved, I worked with the communication staff to get the checklist published on the website. So we had conversations about where on the website the checklist needed to be incorporated. It's honestly still an ongoing conversation as we've continued to discover all the different places where the checklist needs to be referenced and linked. Next slide. As I've already mentioned, staff from various departments were involved. So the community development department, building and Code Enforcement Division and Communications have been the big players in getting this checklist up and running. Some things I've learned throughout the process is that it's still a work in progress as people continue to start to use the checklist and apply to install more electric vehicle supply equipment. I think we'll learn things that maybe could be tweaked and made clearer. And then also just websites are kind of complex with where information is referenced and linked. So one suggestion I have is to really sit down and think about all the different places the checklist needs to be. And in hindsight, I realized that's probably something I could have done a little bit better. I was like, oh, the checklist is going to go here, easy peasy. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, it maybe needs to be referenced here. Oh, and now there's a new spot it needs to be referenced. So the checklist itself was pretty easy to put together, but the website part of it, well, not super complicated, it's just a little bit trickier, just because of, the hierarchies and all the different web pages and links that the city website has. And then maybe another thing to touch on is the, even though I'm the one to handle all of the environmental initiatives for the city, and equivalent to most cities' sustainability specialists, I fall under community development. So that's the same department that building inspections and permitting is under. So I work really closely with these people on a daily basis. I sit right next to them. So that, I think, kind of meant when I brought up the idea of putting the checklist together, my colleagues were receptive. Those relationships already been built and there weren't any issues getting it drafted. So it went really smoothly and everyone was on board. I hope that's the experience that other people have when putting this checklist together. But just because I fall under community development, I think it made it really, really easy to get the checklist done. Next slide. I guess now we can just take questions or chat about checklists.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. That was really informative and helpful for our community members. I really like that it was truly a cross-department division effort in your case. And I think that's great that it went smoothly as you reported it. I'll start us off with one question, but I would encourage anyone to either throw the questions that you have in the chat. Otherwise, maybe just raise your hand if you have something that you would like to vocalize to either Hannah or Lindsay. So Hannah, my first question for you is about how long did the process take from when you first started, bringing it up to the building inspection staff to when it was published on your website?
It was probably a month, and a lot of that time was just it got put a bit on the back burner as other things and other priorities kind of had to move to the forefront. It was kind of almost two phases. I had the meeting with building staff. They drafted it within a few days, and then it kind of sat for a little bit before I got to look at it. And then after that, the kind of final approvals getting on the website was maybe just another week and a half. So I would say probably 2.5 weeks of actual work that progressed, and then a couple more weeks of just lots of people have lots going on. So it kind of got pushed to the back a little bit.
No, that's right. Well, we all are busy and all have other work and gotta juggle that. So thank you. That's a good picture of how long it might take for other communities, and maybe even a little shorter now that you were starting from scratch. And with this template, hopefully that can help cut down the time for other communities. Griffin, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yes, Hannah, great presentation. I liked what you were talking about. It's very helpful. One of the things that I did notice right at the beginning is you said that if a resident or a business already had a 120 volt receptacle and was just plugging a charger into that they didn't need a permit. One of the things that I thought of is that there are some chargers out there that require a 240 volt receptacle. And most of the time they are hardwired, but there are some that you can buy with a 240 volt plug. And so if there was a resident in Oakdale that wanted to install one of these chargers, and they already had a 240 volt receptacle and they were just buying the charger and then plugging it into that receptacle, would they still need to get a permit? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, I don't believe we would require them to get a permit if it's, or if, you know, they moved into a house and it's already there. If they're installing them themselves, the 240 volt, then we would require a permit. But I suppose if it's already there, hopefully someone got a permit previously to have that put there. So
Yeah, yep. Okay, thank you.
Hannah, I also had a question for you related to you briefly mentioned that you might be tweaking things based off of feedback as people start to use this process more. And I guess my question is, have you received any feedback yet, either from users or from you know, the people that worked on developing this?
no, I don't believe anyone has applied for EVSE permit. We honestly don't have that many charging units in Oakdale, and there are some developments that will be putting them in, but they're not quite at that point in the construction process to apply for it. So we haven't really had a chance to see it in action yet. So hopefully that changes.
Yeah, well, that will be exciting when you do get your first one, and I think that's a really good example of part of this program is that there will be more charging being installed, and it's really good to be thinking about this ahead of time, like you all did, so that when that does come in and you start getting applications, that you've already thought about it and you've put the work in ahead of time, so that you're not having to scramble and try and figure out, oh, what do we do with this, if people are trying to do that installation farther down the line. So good proactive work on your part. Lindsay, I had a question for you on the template, and it might seem basic, but so if there, and you probably did mention it as well in your presentation, but if there are parts of the template that maybe don't quite fit or apply to a community, do they have to put that in to their template?
No, they don't. Even in the two like required sections, really, you know, take the language that you use and leave the rest. The kind of the contact information and the table itself, we say they're required because that's what will make up the checklist to enable you to get these points and also provide this service for your community. But really, each line in that table is up to you to decide if you want to include it or not in your checklist that you will produce. The whole thing is a template. It's not a prescription of what you should put on your website, but rather just kind of a bank of ideas and language that you can use if you so choose.
Great. And of course, if there's something that's not on there that you would like to add, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no two communities are the same. So make sure that you know, you have the stuff that you need to include in your community as well.
Great. Are there any other questions for either Hannah or Lindsay today?
Does anybody have any questions about like the staff training kind of segment of today's thing at all? I know that that's kind of just a curveball out of nowhere here. So if you have any questions about that as well.
If not, think about them. Feel free to throw in the chat. Lindsay, would you move on to our next step slide? We can cover that. And if you have questions or still typing, we can come back to questions if needed. But our next steps are, as always, we have these last Wednesday of the month webinars. our next webinar will be on October 25th at the same time, 9 to 10 a.m. So we look forward to seeing you all there. And additionally, as always, we have our recordings, these slide decks, and the different resources that we talked about today posted onto our EV Smart website. And Lindsay will be sending a follow-up email in the next couple of days that has links to all of these things as well, including that permitting checklist and the trainings that they discussed. So keep an eye out for that. Another thing to keep an eye out for is that, as Lindsay has said a couple times, we're about in the middle of our program now, and we would like to offer time for you all to check in with us and for us to check in with you. And so we will be having, we're calling them mid-program check-ins, and we will be sending out via email more information about how you can sign up to have those with us. So keep that in the back of your mind as well, and keep an eye out for that email from Lindsay as well. So if there are no more questions, it looks like oh yes, thank you. I did mention earlier that we have our new staff team members that will be working with us. And so their contact information is listed here if you would like to reach out and talk with any of them. They would be welcome to help you and support you in any way that they can. So their emails are listed here. And if there are no more questions, I just want to give a big thank you to Hannah for joining us today and walking us through the great work that Oakdale is doing. I think having a real life example is so great and helpful. And Hannah, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if communities have questions for you, are you fine if they reach out to you?
Absolutely.
Great. So we'll put your contact information in that follow-up email as well. So thank you for joining us today, Hannah, and thank you, Lindsay, for doing a great job walking through that template. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you in October.